welcome to Lexitecture, a podcast about word origins and histories. My name is Ryan, and in each episode my friend Amy and I present a new word to each other and you, delving into its past, uncovering its secrets, and discovering that even the most basic, unassuming word can offer up precious truth nuggets of wordy trivia gold. If that sounds like the show for you, it probably is, so tell your friends and come along for the ride. Today's episode, Mystic Adamant Spoon.
We are at Harvard University in Boston for the Sound Education Conference. We're here on a panel later on this afternoon. We're recording this on Friday, November 1st. No, we're not. We're recording this
November the 2nd.
November the 2nd. That's right. I'll figure out whether I'm going to keep that later. We have a special guest. That unknown voice that you heard was Kevin Stroud from the History of English podcast. We're super excited that Kevin could be here to join us to talk about some words, and that's one of the great things about being at a conference like this is putting faces to voices and putting voices in places where you may not have them. If you've never listened to Kevin's podcast, it's fantastic. I've never made academically satisfied noises by myself in a car as often as when I'm listening to his show. I'll just find myself going, oh yeah, to nobody.
I was wondering what you meant by academically satisfied.
Those
are good noises, I hope.
Oh, they're good. Yeah, no.
Yeah,
Okay.
academically satisfying noises covers quite a lot of ground. I feel like that's a topic worth exploring. Maybe not right now.
So, welcome, Kevin. Thank you for
Thank you.
joining
It's
us.
good to be here. Looking forward to this.
And so, we don't usually have an order that we go in. So, guest first. Do you want to take it away? Tell us your word and tell us about it.
So I have a word, and I've cheated a little bit because the word that I'm using is actually a word that I'm using in the upcoming next episode of my podcast. So listeners to the History of English podcast will get to hear this etymology twice. But it's a great etymology, and I think I'll have a little bit more of an opportunity to go into some detail here. And one of the things that fascinates me about words and the etymology of words is very common words that we use every day. And one of the words that I'm going to be talking about today is the word spoon.
Oh, very cool.
Oh, I'm excited already.
It's an eating utensil. We use it every day. What a lot of people don't realize is that not only is it an old word, but it's also a word that's influenced some other phrases that we use. If you ever see something that's very clean and neat, we would say it's spick and span. But a lot of people don't realize that the span in spick and span is really the word spoon, just in a different way.
Okay.
So I wanted to try to kind of draw that connection for you today. And in order to understand the etymology, we have to go back to the original version of the word spoon, which was an Old English word, spoon. Spelled pretty much the same way as today, just a little bit different pronunciation. But here's the thing, it did not mean an eating utensil. So it had a completely different meaning back then. It was a chip or a splinter, like off of a piece of wood. In fact, it could mean a thin piece of wood.
Okay.
So sometimes spoons were used as tiles. And so carpenters who would build houses would use them. And in fact, that's the origin of the surname Spooner. A spooner was a tiler. Tiler is also another surname, meant the same thing. So the question is, how did a tile or a chip come to mean a spoon? Well, for that, we actually have to look at Old Norse and the influence of the Vikings.
Who doesn't love a Viking?
So we have this word reintroduced into English by the Vikings, and they actually gave us the meaning of an eating utensil. So how did it go from a chip to an eating utensil? And I thought about the best way to describe that. We do it all the time today. Think about potato chips or tortilla chips. When you're eating dip or guacamole, you take the chip and you dip it in and eat it. You're using a chip as basically an eating utensil. And it appears that that's what the Vikings did, and that's how they transferred the sense from, again, a tile or chip into an eating utensil. We also know that the Vikings actually carved spoons out of wood, so it could have come from the sense of the word spoon or span as a thin piece of wood. But either way, they introduced it into English, and it starts to appear within English in the 1200s, so during the early Middle English period, as English starts to reemerge after the Norman conquest. And that's actually when most of the Norse words first appear, because we don't see it in the Old English documents that were written down in Wessex mostly, didn't have a lot of Viking influence there. So we start to see it when English reemerges in the 1200s and 1300s. Now, when it reemerges, we first have it in the year 1340 in Middle English as spone, meaning an eating utensil. But at the same time, there was a phrase introduced into English that became very common, span new, borrowed directly from Old Norse, which was more like spanur, but at any rate, it basically meant perfectly new or unsoiled. So we have to think about it in the context of a metal spoon that's being forged by a blacksmith or an iron worker. So he would be a he during that period, probably not very many females doing that type of work. But either way, when that spoon came out of the fire, it was considered to be spoon new, unused, unsoiled, perfectly clean. And that phrase became very common throughout the Middle English period. Then, when we get to the 1500s, we see it being modified a little bit. It becomes spick and span new. So there's a little bit added to the front of it. So spick and span, you may wonder what a spick is. Well, it's basically the word spike. Spike and spoon new, spick and span new. It's like a nail, same idea. A nail or a spike coming out of the fire being forged for the first time was new, unused, perfectly new. And so we have that phrase, spick and span new. Some people think that's just alliteration, that people started to add spick and span because it was a repeating sound. Dutch also had the same concept. It could have been borrowed from Dutch. Dutch had spick, splinter new, similar idea. But then about a century later, the new part gets dropped at the end, and it just becomes spick and span, just meaning at that point clean, unused, new, but still retaining within it word for spike, word for spoon, basically just different versions of that. And then one other interesting aspect of that is the term that we use, brand new. If something is brand new, exact same idea. Right. The brand comes from firebrand or branding iron. So it's when something is being forged and it comes out, red hot, it's brand new. Same idea that we find in span new or spick and span new or spick and span. So that's my word for you today.
That is fantastic.
I have to make some academically satisfied noises.
Yeah.
I've been trying very hard not to.
So you didn't interrupt. I thought you were going to jump in.
I think I was wondering about this. I feel like it's easier to interrupt when you're on Skype because if you've heard our episodes in the past, I am a world-class interrupter, and sometimes I feel like I shouldn't do that, and other times I have to just accept that's the human being that I am, and so I interrupt. I love spick and span new. It sounds like a slogan for an ironmonger. It sounds like the blacksmith would be saying, "Here it is, look at my spikes and my spoons. They are perfect."
Yeah. Well, this comes up in the context of occupational surnames, and that's kind of how this research came about, because so many of the surnames that are used today were based on occupations that were very common in the early Middle English period. In the Middle Ages, at a time when occupations were becoming more specialized. Right. And a lot of those occupations have disappeared over time, and the words have disappeared over time. So again, spooner, who would think spooner has anything to do with making tiles? But it does. It goes back to the original version of the word spoon.
And people don't think tanner or cooper or cartwright
Fletcher, arrow maker, So you have wonderful words that still exist, but mainly just exist today as surnames. Yeah. They've largely disappeared from English. And this was an interesting one that I thought was just fascinating, because honestly, I was not aware that spick and span was related to spoons until I did the research for the episode.
Fantastic. I like that. One of the things that I like about this kind of research is the inferences that you can then make from the things you find out. So the idea to me that I think is really delightful is the idea of the Vikings. Like, they're the ones that showed up on the shores of Britannia and went, guys, you're eating with your hands. We could just use these other bits, and we could do this. Like, the Vikings were the ones to civilize the dining experience in Britain.
Well, this makes me
arrived.
wonder, when you started to talk about this, it makes me wonder, what were people eating? Because, you know, there are foods where you can use your hands.
Yeah.
And there are foods where it just doesn't make good sense to use your hands. And so, you know, you use a chip to eat guacamole because otherwise you get slimy avocado all over yourself.
Well, I think if you think of the Middle Ages, I think of, you know, soft foods, porridge and soups and that kind of stuff, broths and brews. And I would assume that many of them just simply drank from the bowl, which was a common technique. And we do know that the Anglo-Saxons and the English up to this point had spoons, but they were very rare. They were really just reserved for the aristocrats, the nobles, the wealthiest people had spoons, but certainly commoners didn't use spoons. And they really didn't have a common word for it until this word was modified to mean spoon. They did, I think, have a type of fork or, you know, something, knives, obviously, for cutting meats. But it's just the evolution of food, and as food changes, diets change, the tools and utensils you need to eat that changes over time as well.
I also like the idea that a Viking showed up, smashed everything to bits in a village, and then thought, I could use these.
Yeah.
And then took the bits of the houses that he just demolished and used that to have his stew.
Yeah, you can.
But utensils are interesting. You know, I feel like that you could have a really good cultural history of utensils. So we both lived in South Korea. Now, when I got to South Korea, chopsticks were the norm, and I had never really used chopsticks before. Korean food is red. A lot of Korean food is bright red, and so were a lot of my clothes for the first while that I was there, because I was not terribly great at using chopsticks. But then I also visited China and Japan while I was there, because those things seemed close by and convenient. And chopsticks are different in each of those countries. So in China they're longer, and in Japan they're a little bit shorter. And my husband and I always commented on the fact that Asia is the land of rice and noodles. Who thought this stuff would be, I know what to do. Let's use 2 long pieces of wood to pick these slippery, small and easily fragmented foodstuffs up. Whereas, a spoon would have really made life much easier.
Would have been, and in Korea, it's the only place I had come across where they have thin metal chopsticks. And if you think chopsticks on their own are hard to use, when they're made of metal,
they're the masterclass chopsticks.
It's like some of the Koreans took a wooden chopstick and went, it's all right, but where's the challenge? And so I want to eat with a slippery metal chopstick because that's how we do. And it was, so it's...
Now, I don't know if this is... this feels like deja vu. I don't know if this is a Scots thing or if it's even a regional Scottish thing, but the word spoon is used occasionally as a sort of a childish insult. Is that something that either of you has ever come across before?
Only on perusing Scottish Twitter for laughs.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. You spoon.
Yeah.
And it's kind of it's a mild pejorative. It's the sort of thing you would say if someone had done something a bit silly, a bit gormless maybe, but it doesn't, you know, it doesn't mean that you have to go home and hang your head in shame, but someone can be a bit of a spoon, or, you know, you're a spoon. The other thing, the other usage that I was thinking of was people talk, you know, the spoon metaphor for mental health. So people will talk about if you suffer from depression or anxiety or a mental health issue, and that takes up a lot of your energy. You know, being sick takes up a lot of your energy. And so people will use this metaphor to say, I have this many spoons today. So,
I have heard that.
So, you know, I feel like today I'm pretty good. I have 20 spoons, but I need to go to the grocery store. I need to talk to my children and feed them and clothe them. And I'm also feeling like a couple of spoons are going to be used up today just by existing as a human being. So I probably won't make plans to go and do this other thing this evening because I'll be out of spoons by then.
Right, yeah.
So, you know, the posts online and the communication becomes low on spoons. And it's a slightly kinder way of saying, I am exhausted from being in this body and this mind today, so let's just cool it with social invitations or that kind of thing. So I love that the brand new perfect, that kind of flair really intrigues me. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
Very cool. Shall we want to go on?
Shall we word?
Shall we word? This is a word that I had used in a previous episode that ended up being scrapped, and I just found the notes for it today again. I was like, oh yeah, that's the one I did that one time that we couldn't use the file for. So
Is it the word recycle?
it should be. I wish. So my word today is adamant.
Oh.
And so these days almost exclusively used in the adjectival sense. You know, if you're adamant about something, you're passionate
Oh, I
about
thought you were
it.
talking about the pop singer from the 80s.
That's just it. This is where spaces are important in words, because all of a sudden you're talking about.
I had forgotten all about this word, and I'm once again laughing at. So, this is another Korea story. My God, have I ever been anywhere else? I used to get the Adamants. That's what Ross and Kat would call it. The Adamants as a concept came about when, so I have no sense of direction whatsoever. Everywhere that I've been over the past 2 days in Boston, I have Google mapped. Everywhere.
Yeah.
Almost to the sort of level of where is the bathroom. And we lived in an apartment block. You would come out of the apartment block. One direction took you to work. The other direction took you to the nearest convenience store. Fine. So I began to realise quite quickly that my husband and my friend and I, who were all going to the same workplace, we'd come to the bottom of the stairs and then they would wait. They would wait to see where I was going. They would wait to see where I was going because I would get it wrong every single time. Every single time. And then they would laugh and I would get angry because they were laughing at me. And this kind of started off with, but you have such adamance about you when you set off in that direction.
Right, yeah.
And we then decided that the adamance was inversely proportional to...
The correct.
Sorry, was directly...
Inversely proportional.
Thank you. Inversely proportional to the likelihood that I was actually correct.
Right, yeah.
Which made me feel much calmer and less angry and unreasonable, of course, straight away. So tell us about adamant, and I will laugh at my own personal variation of that and think about the many times I've been wrong, but strongly wrong.
Yeah. So the current kind of usage in the OED goes back to the early 1800s. So the idea of like unwavering, unshakable, really dedicated, stubborn in your opinions, totally sure about something, or just extending from that, just being very passionate about it. You were passionate about the fact that you turned left to go to work and right to go to the shop, even though you were completely wrong 99% of the time. So that only goes back a couple hundred years, but the word is much older than that. In English, it goes back to the sort of middle of the 16th century, and it really just meant hard, like it was a physical descriptor of something. Just very hard, very tough, very solid. So you can see the connection there. It's if you're adamant about something, you are very strong and hard in your opinions and stuff. And just meant hard, strong, or unbreakable. And then it came back from there earlier than that, and it was a noun. So an adamant was a thing that had those qualities and characteristics. And so it's not at all uncommon for adjectives to come from nouns, because they describe a thing, and then the word becomes about the characteristics rather than the thing. As a noun, it traced back, as so many do, to Latin and Greek. And in antiquity, it was used basically for just whatever the hardest material at hand was. So it didn't have a definite meaning. It was when steel first began to be sort of experimented with in various alloys, and as the transitions from bronze to iron to steel, like every time those transitions happened, the new thing was called adamant.
It's like adamant of the week.
Yeah, exactly.
Damn it, I've been knocked off the top spot again.
This stuff is adamant now. The one consistent thing that it referred to was diamond.
Oh.
And which is where we get the word diamond from. That comes from
diamond.
Diamond, which makes sense, hardest material. So that ran through the whole thing, the whole line of history of the word. But it was interesting that it was sort of more amorphous, as far as oddly amorphous for a thing that means hard and unbreakable, and what it could refer to. And one of the things that we like to do on this show is venture headlong and gleefully into folk etymology, because
the stuff that we make up.
Eventually, everything devolves into it, and eventually something happened. You get to a point in pretty much everywhere, the only difference between various theories are the level of educated in educated guess. Because eventually you run out of written record, and you run out of, this is exactly what has happened here, and whether it's me sitting here or John McWhorter writing a book about a theory about a Phoenician tribe that brought Semitic language to Europe, and that's where certain Proto-Germanic things come from, whatever. Like, eventually you get to the point where it's like, maybe it was this. And so I really like hearing about ancient folk etymology, where the classicists were themselves engaging in that, coming up with things. So one of the etymologies for adamant was the Greek a prefix for the opposite, like antonym,
Alpha
apathetic,
privative.
alpha privative.
Oh, I was so excited when you used an alpha privative because I love to show off that I know what an alpha privative is.
It's a great word.
Yeah.
So you had the atypical apathetic, that
Right.
opposite, a prefix, and then the word meaning to tame. So the idea of an untamable horse, or I mean, dog was less likely there, but something that could not be tamed would be an adamant thing, and that's sort of one of the possible etymologies from that, which may in fact be an early example of folk etymology, because there's the evidence of where that exactly came from is slightly sketchy. The other thing that it was that it was actually a name in Greek with that same meaning, which is one of the reasons why they think it might be a folk etymology, because at the time, at the very same time that that was supposed to have been developing as a origin, it was already in use as a common name to give to someone with that kind of that name meaning of that. So the other theory is that it came from an even earlier source, like a Semitic language, loaned Greek the root to get to that.
Yeah, sure.
But it's but the one thing is that it's always meant unbreakable.
So is it related to the name Adam?
Well, I've been thinking while you're talking about this, the one context I always remember the word adamantine as a young undergraduate being studying Paradise Lost and being told that adamantine chains that were broken was a pun on the name of Adam. So presumably the name Adam, well, if Adam was the first named human being, then he probably wins in the etymology stakes. First name ever? Okay, you can take that.
I guess you can take it.
So they were adamantine chains in the sense that they were unbreakable and hard, but they were also the chains that had come as a result of Adam's actions. So this is how it's used in Paradise Lost.
I like, and this, I think this came up when we first recorded this episode. This is one of the differences between Amy and I, is that her culture reference is Milton, and she goes, Paradise Lost has adamantine chains and the unbreakable chains. And my
It
cultural
would be
reference,
amiss of you not to mention.
and my cultural reference is Marvel,
Oh, okay.
because Wolverine's claws are made from adamantium, which he had grafted to his skeleton, and it was because it's this unbreakable, one of these fictitious Marvel alloys like vibranium for Captain America's shield. So
Unobtainium.
I was going to say unobtainium.
And
Unobtainium is amazing.
And so it's one of those things, but just because it's this mythical thing. So whether you're dealing with Milton or Marvel, it all comes down to an unbreakable atom.
Great topic for a podcast episode, from Milton to
From
Marvel.
Milton
From
to Marvel.
Milton to Marvel. Oh, there are so many. Yeah. The mind is currently boggling. I've just remembered something else I was going to say to you about spoons. Split new. Is that a phrase that either of you have ever used? Like,
Split new.
again, I find myself wondering if it's a Scottish thing or just an idiosyncrasy. And my dad used to say that something was split new. And so it was a phrase that I would hear and know what it meant without ever really considering how it came to mean that thing.
So, wonder what it means. Does it mean like
It's the same notion, like,
but I mean like
just
a
out
piece
of
of
a packet.
wood maybe, or something that's been split? Or...
Yeah, possibly, as in the sense of your original.
Because I
wooden
said
spoon.
that Dutch. We're going way back now to the beginning. Sorry, we've just
That's
we've just
perfect.
completely
Yeah.
looked over your word, Adam, and now we're back
we
to my
do not
word.
have the linear brains.
But
no.
remember, I said that Dutch had a similar phrase, which was spick splinter new.
Yeah.
So
Right.
sort of the same idea, I think, of a splinter. If we go back to the idea of spoons being carved out of wood, you would have began with not a big piece of wood, but a small splinter, a smaller piece of wood. So maybe there's some connection there.
Well, and when you split it, if you have a log that's maybe a bit weathered and worn and kind of maybe even rotten around the outside, but when you split it, the wood inside is often
Right.
quite gorgeous
Fresh
and
and new,
untouched
yeah.
and fresh and new and looks.
Yeah, I wonder. Thank God wood isn't made of adamantium, because then
you'd never know.
spoons would never have come about.
That's right.
And we'd all just have greasy fingers. That's how it would go.
Vikings would be very upset.
But once you had one, it would never go bad.
That's true.
It would always be spick and span.
The adamantium spoon. That is also that feels to me like it's a podcast
See,
waiting
we're
to
making
happen.
connections here. We're throwing things together.
It's all an intricate tapestry.
Cool.
All right.
Okay.
You're up.
I'm still sitting with my hands on the table like I have been bad. And,
Amy is using a lapel mic for the first time in this show's history, and
don't
she's
be
been
calling it a
told
lapel mic when
not
it's
to fidget.
when it's actually called a giant
A
squid.
giant, his lapel mic's name is a giant squid. Yes.
But I was told, well, I was given the giant squid on the condition that I was the person who wouldn't fidget. And frankly, I'm terrified.
Because as soon as you say don't fidget, you become acutely aware of how much fidgeting you do.
Want to be a 5-year-old child who can't sit still. So I arrived in Boston, the day before yesterday. I've never been here before. Very excited to be here. Really, really excited. I travelled with my mum, and we are staying in Somerville, which is, frankly, a cab ride away. I have no idea where it is in relation to anything else.
Right.
But on one of the many cab rides that we've taken to or from the hotel that we're staying in, we passed by Mystic Avenue. And I recalled, because it's the sort of general knowledge fact that my brain likes to hang on to, I recalled that the Mystic River is in Boston. So the first time that I was aware of that was because of the Dennis Lehane novel, Mystic River, which was also made into a film with Tim Robbins and Sean Penn, which is worth checking out, although I wouldn't exactly call it fun. Yeah, sometimes films they're worthy and interesting and entertaining, but not necessarily fun. So I would put it into that category.
It's got Sean Penn in it. I feel like we all could have leapt to that.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It's an exception.
He used up all of his fun for that movie.
All the fun was
now
gone.
It's done.
All of his fun spoons
That's
are
right.
now expired.
He's running out of fun spoons.
So I just love the concept that the river is called the Mystic. It's such an intriguing word. So I thought, well, what is mystic? How did that come to be the case? So I found myself on the Google checking out the Mystic River, where I discovered that, like spoons and logs, sometimes the simplest explanation is the best one. And in fact, the Mystic River, or the place name in Connecticut, US, Etymonline has to say, it is deformed from Algonquian, apologies for my horrendous pronunciation, Missituck, which means Great Tidal River.
Oh.
So the Mystic River is mystic because mystic means big river. It's as simple as that.
Nice.
And the fact that the spelling of mystic is the same as the word that we use to mean spiritual and obscure is just one of those interesting etymological coincidences that make speaking about the etymology of words such an interesting thing to do. So because, I like to do my due diligence, I had a little look at the word mystic in the sense, in the context that we would generally use it. And I discovered that there is a website called takeourword.com. And Take Our Word had a little entry about the root that we get the word mystic from. And the root is the Greek muein, M-U-E-I-N, which means to close your eyes or your mouth. And I just loved that. Something is mystical when your eyes are shut or when your mouth is shut. And most of the spiritual religious experiences, those are things that I associate with spiritualism and mysticism. Being quiet and being in the dark. Because, of course, things which are mystic are difficult to understand. They're out with our empirical understanding. So to close one's eyes or to close one's mouth came to mean to keep something secret. Because if your eyes are closed and your mouth is closed, you can neither see it nor talk about it. So this became the root of words like mystery, something that is secret or that is hidden. And also, interestingly, it formed the noun mustes, which means an initiate. Again, I'm reading here from Take Our Word. Then the Greeks got round to deriving a word to refer to the secret ceremony itself, mysterion. that word soon came to be applied to anything that was secret. So a mysterion, the initiate, the later meaning became mysterium, and English took mystery from Latin in the 14th century. There is also a word, mystery, which means a craft or a trade, which in fact comes quite neatly back around to surnames reflecting crafts and trades. So medieval mystery plays, they are not about secrets and hidden things. They are in fact about members of a craft. They were performed by members of the craft. So you might have the Spooner mystery play going on, or the Fletcher mystery play going on. This last factoid that's given on this particular entry, to the Cockneys of the last century, a mystery bag was, see if you can guess what a mystery bag is.
Oh, I'm terrible at guessing Cockney. I've never been able to do it.
I'm terrible at guessing Cockney, yeah.
It's not rhyming slang. So.
It isn't rhyming slang for once, no.
Mystery bag.
That's good. Even if I had that, I can be presented with the complete breakdown, like a literal walkthrough of Cockney rhyming slang, and I go to the end of it and I go,
I don't get it.
huh? And so, is it in fact some sort of bag?
A mystery bag is a sausage.
Oh, I love everything about that.
That's the perfect name.
That's beautiful.
It really is. What's more mysterious than the contents of a sausage?
Yeah.
This also made me think about the fact that I'm sure I remember learning again as a young undergraduate that the word satire is either the word satire comes from a similar root to the word that then became sausage, or satire and sausage, I forget the exact relationship, but satire and sausage are in some way related. And the kind of folk etymology that's given for that is the notion that satire is about stuffing people full of their own deeds, their own words, and doing that in a way which reflects the humour of that situation. I'm trying to do two things at once and my brain just really isn't capable of it. The mystery bag sausage, I think, just makes me really happy. And when eating a mystery bag sausage, one would most certainly want to close one's eyes and probably one's mouth. So, mystic. I had some other stuff to say about mystic and my notes have gone ugly, but I think that we might just leave it with mystery bag, closed mouth, closed eyes, and a big tidal river in Boston.
I love the closed eyes and closed mouth origin for something that later became, sort of secret and unknowable and undescribable.
And the connection between mystery and a craft or an occupation, because it seems to imply that a lot of crafts, particularly in the Middle Ages, there were certain skills that the normal person didn't have, and you had to go through, the craft guild required the periods of apprenticeship and being a journeyman before you could become a master. It was something that took a long time to figure out. I can imagine it being a mystery in that respect. It's something that how does a blacksmith forge spoons? How do you do that? It's a mystery.
And then you have, of course, ancient societies like the Freemasons, which is exactly the trajectory that you're describing of, we have knowledge that is important and interesting to society as a whole, because without us you're not going to be living anywhere too nice, and we're keeping it secret. It's ours. we're not going to talk about it. So I really love the fact that something so concrete and tangible, closing your eyes and closing your mouth, physical act, becomes something that is so intangible and cerebral, if you like. Is mysticism cerebral? There's an interesting question. Something that happens in the imagination and in the brain rather than something that happens in the body. So I like the transfer between those two states.
That's very cool. I like that.
Adamantine, no.
Mystic
Adamant mystic spoon.
Mystic adamantium spoons.
We can always find connections.
Yeah.
The other thing that's fun is coming up with is discovering by the end of the episode what the episode's going to be called, because we don't know in advance what the words are going to be, and then fitting it together and often they work surprisingly well with the words that we've.
I'm still amazed that ginger and garlic came up the same week.
We independently looked into the ginger and garlic etymologies at the same time without any coordination.
So I know garlic is gar-leek. It's a spear leek or spear onion. Ginger, gingiver or something, I think, in Old English. It had a hard G there initially, and then soft G appeared over time. But it comes from, what, Latin, Greek?
Zingiber.
I remember
Don't remember,
zingaberries.
yeah.
Was
I
the
can't
thing that came
remember.
up as
Why can't I
zinger.
remember? Because we discussed the fact that Zingiber is such a pleasing word. I'd much rather be eating zinger than ginger.
Yeah, but it did transition from a Z to a.
So I'm wondering,
To a
wondering
G.
what the connection is between the two words. I mean, ginger is not, it's not a native Old English word. Is
No.
it? It's borrowed word. Yeah, we won't revisit.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
now,
We'll have to-
but it's sort
I'm
of
gonna have to
interesting.
re-listen to that
But it goes to the point of the podcast I do is a little bit different from what you do, because you take a specific word and follow the etymology out, and then try to find the connections at the end, maybe for a title. Well, that's what I do when I prepare each episode, because I'm dealing with etymologies and a historical narrative, and then I'm trying to find a way to weave those together and find connections between words and a storyline. And so there's a little bit of a skill or craft or mystery to making those connections and trying to link together words and history and etymology. It's not always easy, but very often it does. It reveals itself along the way.
Beautiful.
I find that it's interesting listening to like your show and The Endless Knot and a couple of the other ones and even John McWhorter's show, that he'll kind of brush by these etymologies and I'd be like, this is a cool word. It comes from this. And then they'll move on with the rest of their thing. And I was like, boy, that's our whole episode. That one thing, we would just like really zoom into this one little tiny nugget in there. And then you have to zoom out and you get the whole context. And it's even more baffling than you thought. But
Connections are Diane talked there about aha moments. And that's, for me as a human being and as a teacher, that's like one of the greatest joys of being alive. That moment where you make an academically satisfying noise and go, I see. So, they're the things that keep me doing this. They keep me in it.
It's very cool. Well, Kevin, thanks very much again for coming on and joining us.
Thank you for
It's been a
having me.
pleasure,
This has
and
been great. I've enjoyed
we'll
it.
hopefully get a chance to chat again. When we do our panel, I've been told that the organizers of Sound Education are going to be recording they're going to try to record all the different panels, so we will hopefully have a recording that we can either put out in our feed of that panel, or at least a link that we can post on Twitter and Facebook. But it's going to be really good. We got Mignon Fogarty, Grammar Girl, Kevin, Mr. English, Patrick Cox from World and Words, and then Mark from Endless Knot, as well as Amy and I, all talking about podcasting about words. So talking about talking.
Oh, so exciting!
Which should be
at the Sound Education Conference.
at the Sound Education Conference.
So we're making connections.
That's
again.
right. It's gonna be good. So and by the time this comes out, this conference will be done. But hopefully it'll be an annual thing. So soundeducation.fm should be where any information after the fact anyone wants to get. So thanks very much for.
Thank you.
We'll see you again later.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
That's it for another episode of Lexitecture. If you like what you've heard, please spread the words. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook by searching Lexitecture, Lexitecture, and find us on our website at lexitecture.com. We also love hearing from you, so if you've got a word you'd like us to look into, a tasty bit of trivia to share, or anything else you'd like to tell us, drop us a line at words@lexitecture.com. Talk to you next time. Bye.
Thank you.